Committee of the National Science Board. I'm Maureen Kondik, the chair of our committee on National S&E Policy, and Suresh Babu is our committee vice chair. Let's start by taking roll. Suresh Babu.
Here.
Deborah Ball. Aaron Dominguez. Suresh Garamella. Dorota Brzezinski.
Here.
Mel Huff. Matt Mulkin.
Here.
Julia Phillips.
Here.
Marvian Mateos Rodriguez.
Here.
Beverly Watford.
Here.
Do we have any other members on the phone today or on the meeting?
Roger Gutsy.
And Scott Stanley.
Yvonne Stassen.
Wow.
Wanda Ward.
Excellent. Great to see such a strong attendance. So today we have two agenda items. We're reviewing two indicators reports, detailed narrative outlines. First, we'll discuss a vote on the state of U.S. science and engineering, sometimes referred to as the summary report. This report serves as the biannual mandated deliverable to Congress and is due on March 15th of each even-numbered year. It's the most widely read and accessed of all the indicators reports. Unlike our thematic reports, there are no assigned reviewers. Instead, all SEP committee members reviewed the material for this report. The summary report investigates, highlights, and summarizes the information from the indicators thematic reports as a whole, drawing attention to important trends and comparisons. It offers insights into the global S&E landscape and presents broadly comparable data to examine indicators across regions, countries, and economies. So we have an hour allotted today to discuss the outline for this report. After our discussion of the S&E, the state of the U.S. S&E indicators, we'll discuss and vote on the outline for the thematic report on R&D trends in international comparisons. So indicators is prepared under the guidance of the board by the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, or NCSES, an independent federal statistical agency that's located within the NSF. We're glad, as always, to be working so collaboratively with our far more talented than we are NCSES colleagues in this domain. Staff have sent out outlines that summarize the topics, the data sources, and the substantive changes from the 2022 edition, if any, that the authors have planned. And as a reminder about this meeting, our considerations of the outline today is a major opportunity for us as the NSB to shape the content of this report. Board input and suggestions that are provided at this point in the process will have the most impact and will be most helpful to our NCSES colleagues. So before we get started on our discussion today, we're going to hear one update from the acting deputy director of NCSES, Christina Fryman. Christina?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, awesome. Thank you, Maureen. Before we begin the presentations, I just wanted to share a recent update from the OECD that may impact the content of both the summary report and the R&D thematic report. In the March 2023 edition of the OECD Main Science and Technology Indicators, the OECD has provisionally suppressed a number of R&D indicators for China, dating back to the year 2019. In addition to R&D estimates for the United Kingdom, R&D estimates for the United Kingdom dating back to 2014 were also provisionally revised to a significant degree. While there will be another update of these estimates from the OECD later this year, we do not have any information at this time regarding whether or not these issues will be resolved when the new estimates come out. The resulting impact is that the summary report and the R&D thematic report may not have R&D expenditure data for China for the affected years. As this information is different than what we published previously, we are currently developing a short publication at NCSES that will contain an updated Figure 12 from the 2022 summary report, reflecting the suppressed and revised values for these two countries. We will continue to monitor the situation and adjust more as the information becomes available. Thanks.
me unmute. There we go. Thank you so much, Christina. Before we move on to the detailed narrative outlines, although this data issue has potential implications for policymakers, the discussion at hand today is focused primarily on policy neutral report outlines before us. So the committee should consider the broader implications of this limitation in the data at future meetings as we consider our engagement activities surrounding the indicator report releases. And I want to emphasize to everyone on the call that we remain fully committed to having these reports be the gold standard for data in these areas. And although there might be some limitations in the data, they will be clearly identified and discussed in the reports. I'm very confident, and that they will not compromise the overall quality of the data and the value of the reports to our stakeholders. So does anyone have any questions or comments on the data issue that was raised before we get started? Roger Beachy?
Yes, thanks very much, Christina, for that unfortunate report that had to be given. I guess my concern is whether or not it compromises any of the integrity of the previous reports, and how, whether or not I look forward to seeing the revised figure for first off, and really welcome you get a chance to review that, and with any interpretations that you and your team would like to give it would be helpful, just to make sure it sets the context right. But I do want to I think it is important from the perspective of the last report, the previous report, and any implications thereof. So Maureen, I think this is an important component, and hope that as we learn more, we'll react appropriately and accordingly, because of the way that data how important those data have been to us as we spread information about our collaborators, competitors, and others internationally, and policy and the implications of policy. I know that we are a neutral body, nevertheless our implications. So appreciate the comment. I appreciate what you've done.
Could you perhaps address if this impacts any of the prior indicators reports?
Yes, so we have published what was current data at that time from the OECD, which did include this data, which they have now revised and suppressed. And so that's why we're creating this info chart. So this is one of our quick publications that we have through expedited review, because it is important for us to indicate we are a source of R&D data for the United States, and we want to make sure that we have the most current data on our website. So we will definitely share that when that is available.
Suresh Babu?
So I just now heard the answer for what I was going to ask. Is the old data is going to be removed out of the web page, and that's correct? And is that a correct statement?
So we have published the 2022 summary report and also the thematic report from last cycle. So we will issue this new info chart, and with a press release that says this, or some sort of notification, Gov delivery notification about it, but it is not our policy to go back and republish our reports.
I see. So do you have any forecast on when the data will come back to normal cadence? Do we have any information, or not yet? No.
We don't. So that's a really great question. So while Director Rivers is a part of the working group at the OECD that works on this data, we don't have any, we don't comment on behalf of OECD or can't comment publicly. So we're hoping that it will be fixed. We don't know the timeline.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Are there any other questions or things that people would like to have addressed? Julia? Julia, you need to unmute.
Yeah, the other question is whether there are any other data that can help get at the information that we are really interested in, and I mean, honestly, really need to have, if at all possible.
So yes, so if we are not able to get this data from the OECD, we can explore other data sources. OECD is trying their hardest to work with the different agency or the different countries. So I don't know if our efforts would be any better, but there might be some proxies and some other reports that we can refer to that can get us closer to the information, even though we acknowledge that it doesn't contain the statistical authority that the OECD technology indicators do.
All right. Any other concerns or questions regarding this data point?
There's a question on chat, Christina.
Oh. Do you want me to, I can read the question. Will we prepare our audience in regards to the perception that not sharing data from China may create? I'm thinking about future messaging. So I think maybe that goes to Marie, or would you like me to address it? I think that might be you.
Well, it might be kind of a combination of the two
Could
of
be
us.
both.
I think we as the NSB have an opportunity to message this as we see fit with respect to policy stakeholders and policy implications of this limitation in the data. How it's actually presented in the report, I think I turn back to you, Christina, in terms of making sure. I think my primary concern, and perhaps the question in the chat as well, are getting at helping readers who have used this report in the past and who will be using it in the future to have a heads up about the implications of this.
Yes, and I think that's an important part of when we publish this update, this info chart, that we explain the public note that the OECD has published about the reasons for suppressing the data and how they're working on it. And we can also echo those in the summary report and the thematic R&D report if at the time we still don't have that data. It is very important to us to be transparent because we have published this data in the past, and it is our responsibility to address it.
Absolutely. Any other questions before we move on? Hearing none. Let us move on to our discussion of the summary report. And I think we will start by having NCSES give us a summary of their intentions. I'm going to turn the floor over to the State of the U.S. Science and Engineering authors, Amy Burke, Stephen Deitz, Alex Rhodes, and Claire Boothby. All SEP members have an opportunity to review this report, so we do not have specific members assigned to provide any comments. Amy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maureen. Hello, everyone. Today, I am presenting the proposed outline of the Science and Engineering Indicators 2024 Summary Report, the State of U.S. Science and Engineering. I will begin with an overview of the report and then discuss each of the main topics in more detail. The proposed theme of the 2024 Summary Report is Strengthening U.S. Global Competitiveness Through Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics, or STEM talent, and Scientific Discovery and Scientific Translation. The summary report is a congressionally mandated biennial report on the state of the U.S. science and engineering enterprise in a global context. It summarizes key findings from the 9 thematic reports relative to the scope, quality, and vitality of the S&E enterprise. The 2024 summary report will be similar to the 2022 report in that it will follow the same presentation style, using integrated graphics that are characteristic of this report and narrative text to provide context to the data. The organization of the report follows the major components of the theme, focusing on STEM talent, contributing to scientific discovery, which is then translated through innovative products and technologies. Each of these 3 topics incorporates subject matter from the multiple thematic reports, and collectively, they span the breadth of each of these thematic reports. We will use narrative text to link the indicators back to the competitiveness aspect of the report's theme. We will also continue our sub-theme of the geography of innovation where applicable throughout the report. Some notable changes for the report include a new sidebar on emerging and critical technologies, which is also an additional sub-theme new to this cycle. The impacts of COVID-19, including its effects on STEM education, will be addressed where data are available in the report's main text, rather than via a discussion in a sidebar as we did in 2022. And then the report, the portion of the report where we analyze S&E publications is going to include some new content. We're going to have some data on S&E articles published in open access journals. In addition to these changes, these key indicators of competitiveness in science, technology, and innovation that are presented throughout the report will be connected back to the theme throughout the narrative, primarily in the report executive summary and in the introductions of each section. I will now discuss the components of the report in more detail, focusing on each of the main topics covered in the theme. The first section focuses on STEM talent and will describe US and global STEM education and the labor force, as well as public perceptions of science. Data on test scores for elementary and secondary students indicate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on student learning in STEM, especially for those students at the margins, including students from low socioeconomic backgrounds and those in other demographic groups. For higher education in science and engineering, the report will present trends in the number and share of S&E degree awards from the certificate level through the doctorate level. This section will also include data on enrollment of international students in US universities, shares of S&E degrees earned by international students, and international comparisons of S&E first university and doctoral degree awards. Stay rates of international doctoral students will be discussed. We'll then shift to analyzing the size and growth of the STEM workforce, including the skilled technical workforce. We will be including with this statistics on labor market outcomes, such as median earnings and employment rates. We'll also present the demographic makeup of the STEM workforce. And in this section, to help inform on the sub-theme of the geography of innovation, there will be a US map, similar to how we did last time, indicating how STEM workers are distributed by state. Data on Americans' perceptions about science and how these perceptions vary by education level will round out this first section of the summary report. In all, we expect about 10 to 12 figures for this section. The second section on scientific discovery presents information on US and global research and development, or R&D for short. This section focuses on investment and discoveries resulting from creative or systematic work undertaken to increase the stock of knowledge. It begins with data on US R&D expenditures within a global context by analyzing data on gross domestic expenditures on R&D by the top R&D performing countries. So we're going to be focusing on those countries in this first part of the section. We're going to look at change over time in the distribution of global R&D performance and also national variations among selected countries in R&D intensity and types of R&D. The report will then analyze US trends in the funding or performance of R&D activities by sector. When we're talking about sector, we're talking about business, higher education, or government. And then we'll also be looking by type of activity. That includes basic or applied research and experimental development. The final part of this section focuses on support of R&D and graduate students. We expect about 8 to 10 figures for this section. The third and final section of the summary report focuses on US and global science, technology, and innovation capabilities. This section will present data on the translation of scientific discoveries through indicators of knowledge transfer, invention, innovation, and the output of knowledge and technology intensive industries, or KTI industries for short. KTI industries are industries that make large investments in research and development relative to their output, which is why we focus on them in this particular area. Publications output data, an indicator of knowledge transfer, includes the number of S&E articles published by country and region. We're also going to look at changes in the global distribution of publications over time and shares of highly cited articles, which is a proxy measure for impactful research. New to this report, as I mentioned earlier, will be data on recent trends in open access publishing. Invention and innovation indicators will consist of patents, university technology transfer, U.S. business innovation, and venture capital investment. Patent data will encompass international comparisons as well as geographic and demographic dimensions of U.S. inventors, including patenting at the county level across the entire U.S., also aligning with the subtheme of the geography of innovation. This section will conclude with international comparisons of KTI industry output, including an analysis of recent global trends in the distribution of specific KTI manufacturing and services industries. We will also present trade and value-added data, which indicates trends in global supply chains by looking at the contribution of an industry to production and international supply networks. We expect about 8 figures for this section. Also in this section, we are going to feature a sidebar on select emerging and critical technologies, specifically policy-relevant indicators of global competitiveness in strategically or economically valuable sectors, such as artificial intelligence and semiconductor manufacturing. For example, the sidebar will provide a concise analysis of U.S. science, technology, and innovation capabilities in these particular domains and offer international comparisons with other major economies where feasible. Key indicators expected for this section include R&D expenditures, publications, and patents. Where applicable, we may also incorporate value-added output for related economic sectors. We anticipate that the storyline will be woven together cohesively in the 3 sections with a narrative focus on the connection of the indicators to the theme of U.S. competitiveness in science, technology, and innovation. In addition, we plan to use the executive summary, introduction, and conclusion to explicitly link the subthemes as they pertain to the U.S. S&E enterprise. And finally, per the revised congressional mandate as amended by the CHIPS and Science Act, the summary report is scheduled for publication on March 15th, 2024. Thank you, and I welcome your comments, questions on the proposed outline, and any discussion. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was a very nice and clear presentation of the outline. I'd like to open our conversation with some discussion items and questions, and I'll take the prerogative of asking the first question or opening the first discussion topic. I'm really thrilled to see the emphasis on geography as an important component or theme throughout this, and in particular, I was struck by the notion of presenting patent data on a county by county level. So could you help us appreciate, where this sort of geography lens is going to fit into the rest of the report, and in particular, at what level of granularity? So are we going to be able to get down to counties or congressional districts or other sub-state level districts to present this data as a way of helping our readers appreciate what's happening where?
Yes, I actually wouldn't mind bringing in Carol Robbins, who is the author of the report that this comes from, and I'm sure she would love to tell you about it. She's the brains behind getting these data. So, Carol.
Thank you very much, Amy. You are right. I would love to tell you all about this. So the data that we have at the county level that we will be presenting in the thematic report are trademarks and patents. So 2 separate treatments. And those are data that we are very confident about because we have the addresses of the individuals, right, who are assigned the patents or have filed for the trademarks. And we have not at this point created them into congressional districts from county level data. I suppose that could be done, but I don't know enough about congressional districts to know whether they're really county by county or something else that's laid over. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. That's wonderful. So the remaining kind of geography lens that is going to thread through this report will be at the state level. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. This is our most granular data at this point, is the county level.
Wonderful. Before I open this up to just general committee discussion, and I do see several hands, so I will get to you for sure. I wanted to give Suresh Babu, our committee vice chair, an opportunity to raise any particular questions or issues that he would like to see discussed. Suresh?
Thank you, Maureen and Amy. I think some of you already touched upon some of the questions. So I have 5 questions on all those 3 topics. I'll walk you through briefly. So one of the things, is it possible to add skilled labor data in the topic 1 when we are talking about STEM education and labor force, and see how, especially with reference to emerging technology need? And that's one request. Another one is also, you already talked about state investment, so I don't need to labor that point. And then on the topic 2, which is relevant to US global research and development, can we add contextually with reference to what we are facing in terms of supply chain issues right now, not only on emerging, on also in the traditional technologies too? Finally, on the topic 3, I really like the way when we did on 2022, the network diagram for COVID research. Many of my colleagues really liked that, showing that how we went about it. Is there any way to do a similar network diagram for the emerging technologies, especially where we are going to put a lot more investments in the coming years? With that, those are my comments, Maureen and Amy. I'll stop right now.
Okay, so I think I'll address the skilled worker question at the beginning. So we are going to be talking about the skilled technical workforce specifically in the very first section. And you're asking, how does that connect back to the K-12 education? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, K-12 and STEM education in the state levels too. That's it.
Yeah, so we don't have the granular data at the state level for that. That's mostly national. We do present regional data, which is multi-state level data where available for K-12. So we're not able to link. I see what you're saying. So when we do that state level distribution, can we also do a state level? No, we do not have the data available for that at this time, but we'll continue to look for that. Regarding the net, and just real fast on the network diagram, the COVID, we do have the AI figure. We do have an AI figure for that, the networks that's going to be coming out of the publications. And I'm not really sure that may be our feature for that, for the sidebar, but we're still kind of deciding what's going to be there. And then for the supply chain questions, I would love to call on Francisco, who is the Francisco Morris, who is the author of that report, and see if he has some thoughts. Hi, Francisco.
Hi. So, hello, Suresh and everyone. Yeah, so we plan to have information on supply chain from 2 different angles. In the KTI report, which we're not discussing today, that's actually pending for another outline discussion. That will be trading value added and other supply chain information on the later part of the supply chain, meaning production and sales, for example. And then in the R&D report, we'll be covering the beginnings of the supply chain on R&D, international comparisons, and flow of funds. So kind of a spread in different tiers, but then put together hopefully in the summary report as discussed by Amy. So at least 2 different tiers will feed information into supply chain from the R&D perspective on the one hand that I'm going to discuss a little later today, and then in the KTI report that we are going to discuss at some other point soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Wonderful.
Francisco. And just real fast, just to let you guys know, we have the authors of the summary report, but really all the authors of the thematic report are the authors of the summary report. So we work very closely with them to make sure that what we're doing there reflects what's happening in the thematic reports.
Absolutely. Roger?
Yes, just a couple of things. Amanda answered one of my questions on chat, and that's is whether or not the BC data is granular enough for county level. She said it's not. It's unfortunate because so much of the innovations that come out of regional areas are often lacking resources. So some of the areas that we're going to talk about for publications and patents filed are often not acted on because there isn't regional support, financial support either from the state or from VCs, and they might consider that being incorporated in later data searches. because it often suppresses the translation of data from the universities to the private sector. The second question has to do with whether or not we're dealing with patents filed or patents issued. Filing and issuing are two different sets, and sometimes patents are not worth filing. Other times they don't have the money to file them to follow through. So I wonder if we're dealing with patents filed as well as issued. Thanks.
Carol?
Sure, yeah. So you're right. There are data from the USPTO on patents filed and patents granted. What we have been doing is using patents granted. We have, limitations, space limitations, and we have thought that patents granted was the best way to do that. That said, at the international level, the data that we're using is actually the filing of patents because that's what our data set allows. And so I guess I would like to hear from you if you have a sense, obviously we can't change it for 2024. Do you have a sense that patents filed is a better measure than patents granted? We do know, of course, that there's a lag in between, but would you rather see patents filed than patents granted?
Well, there's a value to having patents filed information that at least tells us that people are thinking about innovation, right? They may not be truly inventive in that it's not novel, it's not a novel idea or an improvement on existing patent, but it at least says that we have an entrepreneurial attitude. And I think that's as important in a translation out of universities, having that evidence of innovation attitude is almost as important as an intellectual contribution. So beyond innovation per se, I think it'd be useful data to have. Whether or not it's worth putting in the report's another question. But I think it's, at least that's my opinion, that I think it would be useful for us to know whether or not we are seeing trend changes over time. Especially
so the data are available. And so in the future, so what we could do in between cycles, Amy and I everyone else can talk about this. You could imagine that we could do an intermediate product that compares the two. And the other thing I wanted to share is that we use data from Autumn, which is the University Technology Transfer organizations, and we are able to look at that at the state level, and there we see invention disclosures.
That's great. Do we have an indication whether MSIs and HBCUs have Autumn representation?
That's really an excellent question, and one that I think everyone's concerned about, because a technology transfer office is an expensive thing to set up. And I think that's one of the limitations of those data. So yeah, I think you're right to raise that point, but that's the data that we're aware of at the current moment. Our total patents issued does include all academic institutions.
Right. Yeah, that's the most, that is truly useful information. But so is the other intent and the limitations of regions and institutions to demonstrate their relevance, as it were.
Well, it might be worth considering, as Carol mentioned, an intermediate product. That
I like the idea a lot, Carol, of the intermediate.
And also compare institutions, right?
Yeah, those are fun, and if we have the resources, I'm sure we'll see whether we can put that together. Amy and I will
Thanks very much. Serving the general public versus providing information to the NSB are both informative indications. Thanks very much, Carol.
Thank you. Kivan?
So I see that Julia Phillips has her hand raised as well, and
yes,
she's leading a group of us on the talent development working group. I imagine we may be having similar comments. If you don't mind, Julia, maybe you go before me.
Well, thank you, Kayvon. I imagine that at the very least, our comments will be very complimentary. Before I get into the talent development, the one thing I wanted to say, which strikes maybe a nit, but could be important, and that is the theme, as stated, has, I believe, 3 ands in it, which is just not a good thing if you can avoid it. And so I would think hard about how you might capture that concept because I like the concept in general, with somewhat different wording. So that nit aside, the first question that I had was whether there is some way of capturing how STEM talent contributes to economic competitiveness and national security. It feels the way the outline is done, which is very logical and fine in general, but it may not emphasize the messages we want to emphasize. Feels kind of chunked up. And so, the role of STEM talent all the way from scientific discovery through economic impact and national security by way of products and technologies. And so I don't know if there's some way of pulling the threads of that story through from the various thematic reports. So I'll just ask that question first.
So I think that I had said that we're going to try to link the theme throughout. So I guess, we could definitely begin to look back, and if there are places where we haven't made that as explicit enough, we can look into that. There have been data. I mean, the way that we organize it is so that you can see the linking. So we have the theme of the inputs, and that's our STEM talent, and they do the scientific discovery, which then leads to the translation. But the STEM talent is what fuels the next two sections. So I guess maybe if we could just make that a little bit more explicit in our narrative, so that people will understand that that is kind of why we have the organization the way that we do. Is that kind of what you're asking? Is that we just play we bring that out a little bit more explicitly?
I think that's probably what I'm asking for. And the other thing is anticipating what the board summary product, which is at some level a synthesis with policy implications of the summary report as well as the thematic reports, that this is a theme that is likely to want to be expressed rather strongly in that regard, as well as the implications for it. So that's not explicitly NCSES's responsibility. However, if things are presented in a conducive way, it makes it a little easier. So that's the first point. So,
yeah, I think we can do that.
Great.
I need to check with the thematic report authors and make sure what we're covering is still very similar to what we did last time, because I think there are some more explicit data connections we can make. But yes, I think that's very reasonable to do. Thank you for that.
Okay, the geography, maybe we've sort of covered this to the extent that you can. The geography is really important, and you talked about it particularly with regard to the STEM workforce and innovation. The question is, what, if anything, can we do at the pre-K through 12 community college, as well as the kind of BS and PhD levels? It sounds like state level is about the best we can do on that. Is that, or state or maybe regional level? Is that? Did I get that right?
Yeah, for the testing, to the best of my knowledge, and I would have to consult with my co-author to confirm this, but to the best of my knowledge, I think that we have regional level data there, and that's at the national level. So it's more of like the South versus the West versus the Midwest and the Northeast, I think, are kind of the main regions. But Steve, would you want to talk about the data but you want to talk about higher education also, like what we might have at higher education, correct? Like degree awards?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of, that's your availability pool by the time you get up to the community college and higher.
Yeah, so in the higher ed report, we will have some geographical information. We have a section on that with maps at the state level showing shares of degrees in S&E fields. At the moment, we have not planned for a map of that in the summary report too. I think we're still, making the decisions about where we want to, focus most geographically. But in principle, we can do that and even go more specific on degrees at least. That might present some discontinuity between maps at different levels, in terms of the report being a little disjointed. But in theory, at least the higher education data can get quite specific, even closer than state level.
Right. And, I do appreciate that you want this report to be of finite length and hopefully catchy. So, some of these may be a little ambitious, but these may be points at which you can point back to other sources of data or the thematic reports themselves. So I do understand that you can't put in the kitchen sink here. Moving on to education and thinking K-12, just a couple of thoughts. One is emphasizing test scores is important, and I've certainly done it. The double-edged sword is that by emphasizing test scores, you can increase kind of that implicit emphasis on teaching to the test, so just being aware of that, I think, is important. One of the things that I pulled out from the K-12 report was the widening gap in test scores between the top and the bottom post-COVID. And I think that may well be worth a sentence. It's probably not a graphic or anything, but a sentence or some kind of comment about it, because I think that is a huge issue. The other question, and this may not be for the summary report, although it could tie into test scores in a moderating way, which is whether there are any data on the change in STEM teacher availability and the experience of those teachers.
So you're asking about data on STEM teacher availability post-COVID in particular, or just in general?
Yeah, well, changes over time. So yes,
okay.
Post-COVID would be a piece of it. But certainly there's a strong correlation between teacher experience and test scores. So that's one way of maybe, kind of soft pedaling the test score business a little bit. So experience, but also anecdotally, we are hearing so much about teachers fleeing the field. And
yes,
so,
I have been hearing that anecdotally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about the data that we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't need to speak over.
No, you're good. You're good.
No, if I just may, it's an excellent point, Julia. It's also known that there are schools right now which went to the 4-day school week instead of 5. Do we have any data on that? And it's all post-COVID.
Not that I'm aware of. If we do, we haven't put that in the thematic report. I know that we have in the last thematic report, we did make a point, and we're continuing that in this one of the K-12 of making sure that we talked about teacher experience, and how that varies by the demographic of the student demographics by schools. And so we want to continue to make sure that those different facets are always presented together so that people can begin to see those connections. So I do understand what you're saying there, and we do have a commitment to that. I don't know about the 4-day thing, and I don't know about the fleeing, how much, good data is out there. When we can't find data that's representative, we do try to do sidebars and things like that to explore the literature. So I will talk to, but we can always keep those things in mind to make sure that those things are very much a part of the narrative.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is, systemic or this is just local, but definitely, I think I read it in WashPost and New York Times somewhere in the last few weeks, but I think it really connects to what Julia said, the shortage of STEM teachers, but also generally, we know that there was a massive departure of teachers from K-12 after COVID. So if this can be captured.
I think what I'm hearing from all of these comments is the K through 12 test scores, even though we don't want to overemphasize test scores, but they were very dramatic. And in particular, the point that Julia pulled out of the widening gap between the top scores and the lowest scores. The other thing that struck me about that report that I think is worthy of a mention in the summary report in some capacity is that it wasn't just across the board gray phenomenon, but there were particular regions of the country and particular demographics in the country that were far more impacted than others. And I think it's given that this is one of the themes, that STEM talent is one of the themes, and this is where it all starts, I think it's well worth thinking about how that can be highlighted in a way that's useful to the readers.
Yeah, and I think
I mean, go ahead.
I just was going to say real quickly, I think that we are focusing primarily on the scores this cycle because of the dramatic changes due to COVID, and that really is the story. So we will be looking at it from different aspects as you're talking about, Maureen.
Okay. Julia, did you have any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to go to Kivan.
Couple of quick ones. And I mean, I think one of the things this points out is that there will be a lot more discussions and probably additional products in this general area over and beyond indicators and the thematic report. For the next one is that emphasizing that I think it's really important to break out the types of STEM when you start talking about demographics and some of the other things, at least SBE and others, but probably somewhat other divisions too, engineering, physical sciences, life sciences, and the like, because the demographics are very different from one to the next. And so talking about STEM writ large washes out a lot of that, and you can miss some really important points. So that's just a statement, and that's been done before, and it's just a plea to continue. The last point is having to do with international students, and the trends in U.S. population of international students, day rates is important, but the comparison to other countries is also very important because other countries are doing things differently than the U.S., and I think it's important to be watching and monitoring those trends. I am finished, finally.
Thank you, Julia, for those excellent comments. Always very broad-reaching and very insightful. Kivan, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, just one or two things. First, I really want to amplify the point that Suresh made a little while back in the conversation about the real interest in this the technically skilled workforce, that component of talent development or the available talent pool. So I just want to emphasize again, I mean, I think that's a really important piece of the overall STEM workforce that we want to make sure is captured, and it is one of those thematic strands. I can see it tying in that strand, tying all the way into toward the end of the report. I'm really interested in this sidebar, this new sidebar on emerging and critical technologies. There's an article in the New York Times just today, I'll put a link in the chat in a minute, about the semiconductor boom, manufacturing boom, all of this, billions of dollars of investment going into to reshoring that capacity, but the lack of technically skilled workers to fill all of those jobs that are suddenly becoming available.
Yep.
So that's just one thought. Just again, that's the technically skilled workforce, how that ties into this really interesting idea of emerging and critical technologies. The last thing I wanted to ask, or the question I wanted to ask that ties into all that, is in the report, in talking about the labor force, STEM education and the labor force, is there a way to capture not just sort of how many people are earning degrees, how many people are in the workforce and the makeup thereof, but how all of that relates to the talent, how much talent we need to develop, right? One of the things that that I thought was really impactful about this New York Times article today is it starts with the capacity that's needed, and then kind of arcs back to the shortage of skilled technical workers that we have. Oh, thanks, Carol. That's indeed the one. Does the question make sense? Is there a way to capture, because we have this other, the board has this how do we bring out how much talent, what's the size of the labor workforce that we need, especially in these critical and emerging technologies, and then relate the workforce that we're developing to the need that we have. I hope that's
so do we have any data on demand, I guess is kind of
demand. Thank you.
Quick short.
Yeah, so I mean, we are when we begin to talk about shortages and needed capacity, that is kind of going a little bit beyond the scope of indicators and delving a little bit more into the policy world. As much as our data can help inform some of those things for some policy briefs that you might want to do, we can definitely support work in that area. We do have a section in the labor force thematic report where we do talk about some of the projections that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has done. That's in a sidebar. We can look at that and share some of those data. I do think that when you were talking, Kayvon, the thing that you said about the missing millions is exactly what I was thinking. I was saying all the data that we put out there about the demographic composition of the STEM workforce really gets to this. If you're saying there's a shortage and you're looking at entire swaths of different demographic people being excluded from or geographically excluded from the STEM workforce, then I think you might have a little bit of your answer of like, what can we, where do we need to go there? So I do think that these data all speak to some of that, but making those connections sometimes kind of goes a little bit beyond some of the indicators piece of it. But again, we can always work collaboratively to try and see what we can provide in that space.
I guess I would say, Maureen gave the right one word version of what I was trying to say is, do we have data on the demand?
Right. And I do want to emphasize, Kayvon, in support of what Amy just said, that we want to be cautious about looking at projections, because projections are not data, right? They're anticipations of future need that we may or may not come about, right? So I guess my question, following up on Kayvon's idea, is do we have more substantive data real time about things like unfilled positions in particular industries? Right. I mean, does anybody report on this? And if so, that would be a good indication of demand. That we've posted 10,000 positions in some aspect of semiconductor technology, and they've been outstanding for 6 months or a year, and we haven't been able to fill them. That would be a very different thing from a sort of a policy spin on what we think the demand might end up looking like. So is there anything available in that space or no?
So we definitely have explored data to kind of get at demand. To be honest, when we do that, it's hard to say a demand across a national level or even a state level. Sometimes when we did it, it was very, very granular. And even then it was very specific. I do believe that one of the issues we have when we begin to get into data about what do you call that? The job postings that are out there and whether people are applying or not, we kind of get into this area of fitness for use that we would need to evaluate the quality of those data and how fit for use they would be. That would be more of a exploratory type of project for us, but we have been in those spaces and we've been exploring what we could do to try and get at some of this. But to be honest, the data just it's not quite at the level what we would need to in order to be able to do something that would be of the quality that we would need for something like this, I think. And I would invite, Amilda or someone else if they want to speak to this. So, but we are exploring those things. And I think that we would need to also look into different kinds of data. I mean, different types of administrative data and things like that. So, and we are in those phases. We have several projects that we're doing right now at NCSES that's kind of helping us get a handle on the different alternative data sets that are out there. But right now, we are still in that exploration phase.
All right, we have about 5 more minutes, and I see 2 more hands, Marty and then Wanda.
Okay, here we go. I'll try to be really succinct and fast. Can you guys hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, okay, perfect. So one point that I would like to pull the thread on is the point that Julia brought on the different fields and the scarcity, let's call it, or in different fields, or the abundance of talent in different fields varies widely in STEM and the demographics too. And this point is actually connected to what Kevin is saying on demand. And the way I connect the 2 points is that if you understand that, for example, for an emergent field such as AI, you need a specific fields of engineering, and math, for example, then you need to see the data, right? So what I mean by that is we don't necessarily have we need a threshold and for the demand for but that needs to be specific to the area of the field that we're talking about. It cannot be like what's the demand for the overall STEM fields, right? Because that information it's not specific enough to be valuable, in my opinion. But if we can say the demand specifically for AI is this and the supply is this, then that will be a little bit more valuable because then you have a target. And if you have that information real time, that will be fabulous. I can see, though, the challenges in that the way we, the taxonomy that we use for fields of science and engineering is actually different than the taxonomy used for job postings. And so those are not like one-to-one match. If you're a chemical engineer, you could be filling a lot of different positions, and the positions that you're filling do not say chemical engineering, right? So that's going to be a challenge. One of the things that I wanted to point out really quickly is that in the third area, or the third point, the innovation part of innovation capabilities. Something that I did not necessarily see in the description is the connection of, or the statistics on startups, and what type of information can we get from there? Because I'm thinking, okay, so yes, publications, yes, patents, but then what else, right? How can we actually get information from the people that are not patenting, not publishing, but they have trade secrets, lots of them? And how do we spark, right, innovation in areas that, they're not necessarily even novel, but it sparks the economy, and they actually use a lot of R&D and science and engineering.
So Amy, do we have any startup data that could potentially be addressed or included in the
Go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, so we do include that. There are 2 different data sources that we include. One is university-related startups, and that again comes from the Autumn database. And some things are kind of interesting. You see that startups more likely take place in the state, right, where the university exists. And in the past, we have also included a figure of overall startups that are taking place in the economy. So those are 2 ways we address this issue.
Awesome. And so, and finally, just the other comment, just one little thing, very positive on the report. I really like the structure of the report. It just, in my head anyway, it flows logically. Those were my points.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marvi. So Wanda, very briefly, if we could hear from you.
Very briefly, my question is, will we have another meeting in the foreseeable future to continue this discussion? Some of my comments, I don't want to go over time, and so some of my comments are better kept for another discussion. Or to whom should I send any thoughts?
You can send, written comments are always fabulous, and you can send them to me and to Amanda. That would be great. And they will certainly be taken under advisement by NCBCS. If your questions or concerns have more to do with policy, then yes, those should be, for other publications that we might want to bring out some of the.
They really are data and indicator oriented, which is the focus of this task.
Correct.
But existing policy suggest some additional data or additional approaches that we might need.
But
based
take a
on
few
the
minutes, Wanda,
application.
and let us know what you're thinking.
That's terrific. Will do.
Okay. All right. Let's see. So as we draw this discussion to a close, I'd like to see if anybody from NCSES would like to add anything on this report or on our discussion. Hearing
No, I
none.
think we're good. Thank you.
Wonderful. Then I would like to thank everybody. This has been a very productive and engaging conversation. I think you've provided a lot of useful feedback to NCSES. And as I said, if anyone has additional or more specific comments that they would like to address, try to send them as quickly as you can to myself or to Amanda, and we will make sure to forward them on to the appropriate people. So I think we are ready to have a vote to either recommend or not recommend this report. As a reminder, only SEP committee members may vote. Amanda, do we still have a quorum?
Yes, you do.
Wonderful. So I would like now to take a vote of the SEP committee to approve the narrative outline as amended, if applicable, based on this discussion. And remember that only SEP members may vote. So if you would please make sure your mics are not muted. All in favor of approving the narrative outline, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Well, thank you all then. This narrative outline is approved based on this vote. So with that, I'm going to turn to our second outline for today's meeting, the R&D thematic report. So in addition to a detailed narrative outline, NCSES has shared a list of report reviewers for the R&D thematic report. And if you have any suggestions for additions to the reviewer list, such as perhaps people who might offer an additional perspective or topic areas of expertise, please email that information to me and Suresh, copying to Amanda. We will certainly share your suggestions with NCSES as they finalize their reviewer list in their broader process to ensure that there's balanced coverage of each thematic report's topic areas. And for this, I really want to commend this to the attention of the new members of the board, because you bring your own unique perspectives. And so it's an opportunity for you to look critically at the reviewer list. And if you're aware of people who you feel bring some novel expertise or a valuable perspective, we would truly welcome those suggestions. So following the presentation by the report authors, the reviewers will start the discussion, and then we'll open it up to full committee and allow general discussion with the authors. And at the end of the discussion, if we still have a quorum of committee, we will have a vote on approval of this detailed narrative outline, subject to any input the authors receive. So I'm going to return the floor over to the report authors, Francisco Morris and Alexandra Rhodes. The lead reviewer for this report is Roger Beachy, and additional reviewers are Kivan Strassen and Wanda Ward. So Francisco, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maureen. And thank you, Amy, just for sharing the slide. So so this report will analyze trends on R&D in the US and globally, as we have just talked a little bit in the summary report. So we are now diving into this particular report focused on R&D per se. So we will focus on US and global trends across all economic sectors, including R&D performance and funding and type of R&D. That is to say, basic, applied, and experimental development based on international standards. In terms of notable changes, so we do have, of course, a whole section on international R&D comparisons that will cover all sectors of the economy, broadly speaking. However, there were a couple of subsections on business and government that will be removed in favor of some of the new material that will be covered, as I'm going to discuss next. So in terms of the new focus or areas for this cycle, The business R&D section will focus on the same R&D intensive industries covered in the KTI report. There would be also new state level information on R&D following the methodology of the gross domestic product. And there will be as well new information on emerging technologies R&D, such as AI and biotech. So now moving on to the main topics. Number one, as usual, we'll be covering US trends across all economic sectors, business, government, federal government, state government, universities, and nonprofit sector, and drawing from the feature publication here from the national patterns that put together data across our different surveys. Moving on to business and federal R&D. On business R&D, as I noted briefly, we are going to have a very specific focus on the R&D intensive industries that are also covered in the KTI report. And this is done to facilitate readers interested in supply chain focus, so the supply chain actually starts with R&D and then move on to other steps in the production process, so that by having the same focus of industries in this R&D report vis-a-vis the KTI report will be hopefully easier to put together information on this topic across reports and even in the summary report as we just discussed. A couple of themes that also will impact both the business and federal R&D discussion will be the Chips and Science Act, again covering business and federal, and then emerging technologies R&D as well is another theme that will cut across both of these sector performance and funding of R&D, business and federal. And again, there we will be drawing information from both surveys as available and also federal administrative data on a number of technologies, including, for example, quantum science, for example, if there is the information available. Moving on to topic number 3. This is a completely new information on R&D in the context of national accounts. So R&D is considered as an investment in the economic accounts produced by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So they take our survey data and then put our data in the methodology of the economic accounts. And then this is a prelude to then introduce some new data at the state level on R&D investments that fits into the GDP methodology. So this is data that is coming from a multi-year project that we have with the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So this will be the first time that this will be covered, and hopefully it will be an additional input into the geography of R&D and innovation that we also commented on earlier today. And lastly, the topic number 4, cross-national R&D comparisons. Yet again, we will be covering comparing national totals, but also across sectors of the economy across countries. And we'll be focused on top R&D countries, subject to some of the limitations that we mentioned at the very beginning of this session. So with this, I thank you, and I'm open for look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn the discussion over to Roger, our lead reviewer, who will provide us with his comments and questions, and also open the floor for discussion and questions.
Maureen, could I just ask a quick definitional question? Because there's a word being used here that I'm not familiar with, and the word is account. What do the accounts refer to? Sorry.
Yeah, so this is referring to the national economic accounts, the gross domestic product. This is based on Bureau of Economic Analysis methodology and also from the OECD. So these are, for example, production consumption accounts and investment accounts. So that's the terminology in the GDP. So R&D belongs to an investment account. So that's what the terminology of accounts refer in this particular sidebar. Number 3, in the topic number 3.
Account is like a category, basically.
Yes. Yes, so we can think about consumption and investment as different accounts within the GDP. So R&D in the context of GDP, R&D will fit into the investment account.
Right. So they are essentially categories rather than accounts in the sense of money. So
yes, and this will be in a particular terminology used in the sidebar, right? This is not going to be used elsewhere in the report, but this is something that is the methodology that we will be describing and defining within the sidebar. So this terminology is limited to the sidebar per se.
Okay. Wonderful. So Roger, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Roger Beachy. Amanda.
We may have lost him. I'll reach out to Roger and see if we can get him back on.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, then we can open up the discussion to the committee as a whole. So Marvi had a question or a comment?
Yeah, so first, I think I really love the information around R&D in the national economic accounts. I think that it is definitely information. I'm glad it's being included. I don't understand why it's a sidebar and not a section, but maybe that's just the way the document is structured. But I had difficulty understanding why is this a sidebar and why is it not like one of the structure sections, pillars of the report. The other thing too is that from point 2 and point 1, like trends in U.S. R&D performance and funding, and then the second one is like U.S. business and federal R&D. It seems to me that when I read the descriptions, I had a hard time understanding the good differentiators between the two. The only biggest differentiator that I thought was, well, maybe one is more recent trends and then the other one is more, or maybe one is more performance based. But anyhow, any way you can actually address that, like a differentiation between the two sessions that is clear or clearer, that would be great. And also understand that typically I think like big and then small and then smaller, right? So maybe it is the order of the two sessions. Maybe I thought that this section number 2 should go first, section number 1 should go second, because it seems like smaller. And then finally, in the contest, sorry, I have an automatic light here in this office where I am, and my light keeps on going down. Okay, so the last point that I wanted to make is in the contest. So this is in the section number 3 specifically, cross-national R&D comparisons. So I think it's important to provide context on why the information is important. So, and I know that that's kind of obvious to us, but so make a clear connection, and maybe you do this in the sidebar, a clear connection of the relation between, or correlation between R&D and the economy of a country. And that doesn't have to necessarily be made by speculations. You could do that with historical information. But I think in the general context of the, maybe you could do that, and it will provide a lot of weight to the report.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Marvi. I'm going to circle back to Kivan and Wanda, who were the secondary reviewers, and I kind of jumped over them. So Kivan, did you have any comments?
Well, really just one for now, anyway. And thinking about the trends over time, I'm wondering how far back it would be useful to look back. When we had our recent conversations with members and staffers on the Hill, there's a lot of interest and discussion around sort of comparing the present moment of R&D investment to, say, the post-Sputnik era, right? And the emergence of the National Defense Education Act. So what that put in my mind is it would be really useful, I think, at least right now, given the kind of interest and conversations that are being had. If there could be even just a snapshot, it wouldn't have to be sort of a full trend analysis, for the last 75 years necessarily, but even just a snapshot comparing some meaningful comparison of R&D investment. I don't know what the relevant metrics would be, but to that time.
To the authors, are there any indicators that actually stretch back over that period of time that Kivan is referring to?
So yeah, if I need to address that right now, yes. So R&D time series actually go back to at least the 1950s. So and even when we talk about the GDP context as well. So broadly speaking, yes, the data will be there going back to the 1950s. Now, some of the details may not be available that far back, but the high level time series from us anyways do go back to the 1950s. So we could address some of those questions given along those lines at the higher level that is available.
Thank you. Kivan, anything else, or can we hear from Wanda?
Yeah, no, I have some other things, but we can come back. That was my main one.
Okay, Wanda.
Thank you, Maureen. And for this section and the previous discussion, I definitely want to commend NCSES for the consistently gold standard level of production of these indicators. And perhaps I'll say largely what I was going to say before, understanding that this is data reporting indicators and not policy setting, but looking at the implications. And this is similar to what Kayvon and others were speaking about earlier. One of the things we as a board in the world use these data for are the implications. Are there implications? And this is not going to be policy focused, but basically one can ask, how can the US meet the 21st century needs, particularly the next 25 to 50 years? And one of the clear take-home messages from all of the data that have been provided to us is the criticality of the demography of domestic talent, not to the exclusion of international engagement, but throughout everything that we are reviewing, the criticality of the demography of domestic talent looms quite large. And when we're thinking about demography, and more particularly when we're thinking about diversity and inclusion, not only are we talking about the composition of who participates across all of these topics that we are looking at, but importantly, we're also addressing the intellectual diversity of thought, and that is ways of knowing and ways of seeing things. One of the suggestions there for both discussions is, are there, for lack of a better phrase, credible indicators of productivity beyond publications, patents, KDI, inputs? That can't be addressed, well, to the extent it can be addressed in 2024, I would encourage our NCSES colleagues to think deeply about that. We have a number of take-home messages that the 2022 and previous indicators pointed out, and that was the criticality of the data of the demographics at the bachelor's level and above. We know that minoritized communities are underrepresented at this level and more represented at the midstream. As much data as we can continue to have will certainly inform NSB's address of Vision 2030 moving forward.
Right. I think these are really, really key points, and certainly things that we have a great interest in. But I do think we need to stay focused on the data at this point, rather
All
than
right.
on any
Well,
policy
well,
implications
okay.
or potential directions that those things can inform.
Totally agree with you, Maureen. One of the questions I would ask then is the capability of more demography on areas like entrepreneurship. I
Yes.
think it indicated that there was some data on that. The demography of entrepreneurship, including who invests in whom. This is clear. This is related to Marvy's earlier conversation about the startups. If we look at this by demography, who's getting investments for early startups, angel investors, et cetera. And in our attention to publications, it would be very helpful to know about demographic differences in authorship and co-authorship, particularly by gender, i.e. who were the first authors, et cetera. So to the extent that we could have some additional information, data on that, that would be quite helpful. And then finally, our emphasis on the geography of innovation contrasts with where many of the diverse populations actually reside. And so if we could get crisper data from NCSS through the indicators about the geographic distribution of populations, diverse populations, it could inform our address of the geography of innovation. That's it. Thanks, Maureen.
All excellent comments. We did hear from Roger. He communicates that he is supportive of the report and had no major concerns, but had to leave for personal reasons. Suresh Babu, you have your hand up. And then I think we are heading to the end, bottom of the half hour. So we'll need to wrap up. Suresh? Oh, you need to unmute.
Maureen, thank you. Just a reconfirmation on the topic number 3, gross domestic R&D expenditures and R&D intensity. That data will be granular in each county level, state level, and is it possible to look at the previous report and current report and building on Wanda and Kaiwan's, like showing the progress, what's going to happen in this time? Is it possible?
All right, so for R&D specifically, Suresh, the data is available, broadly speaking, by state, right? And it will be covered in the report. We might be able to cite, for example, some studies that might be more granular, like case studies and things like that. But as far as national comparable data, I think for R&D specifically, the most that we can go as of now is at the state level, Suresh. But again, that would be other indicators that will be put together as we talk in the first part. If I may, I should address the questions at the beginning of the discussion. In terms of why the GDP section is a sidebar, so the data as we discussed for the definition of accounts, the data there will be slightly different in a different context compared to the rest of the TR. So that's kind of a reasoning for the sidebar, but we could consider that to be a subsection if it comes to that. A good question on the difference between the topics number 1 and number 2, and how to differentiate between them. So in the overall trends that we cover all sectors, we cover all sectors on the same footing, if you will, in terms of major trends. And then the separate section of business R&D and federal R&D then drill down for data in the respective sectors categories. For example, in the business sector, we talk about industries. And then in the federal sector, we talk about agencies and some initiatives that are federally funded, for example, or mandated. So that's the difference between a cross-sector discussion at the beginning and then drilling down in those two sectors. And then, of course, universities covered in another report. So that's why we focus on business and federal in this particular report. And I believe I covered all questions. Actually, I think there was something on cross-national comparison. So one of the indicators that will be covered there will be R&D intensity measured by R&D to GDP ratios as far as comparing countries. So that's one way that many countries focus on when they do their S&T policy. So that's one measure that points to the importance of the comparison across countries, looking at, for example, that one indicator. And now I believe I covered all questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francisco. I think if I could just pull a theme out of many of the comments, there's obviously huge interest in the board on the missing millions and on STEM opportunities for everyone and geography of innovation for everyone. I think this is also a theme within the NSF. And the challenge is, I think we all appreciate that the same demographic markers, the same kinds of data are not available universally across all the various sources of data that you use to compile these reports. But to whatever extent it is possible to pull out that kind of cross-cutting granularity from the data sets, I think it would be very welcome to us on the board and also to people who use these reports. As we wind up our discussion, anybody from NCS leadership or their team in general who has any comments or clarifications or anything they'd like to add to our discussion? All right, then. Thank you, everyone. Again, an excellent discussion and a very concise one. I'm very happy to say that we got through a lot of material and a lot of ideas and a lot of input in a relatively short time. So thanks to everyone. Amanda, do we still have a quorum?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right, I believe we're ready now to vote. And as a reminder, only SEP committee members may vote. So we'll take a vote on approving or not the detailed narrative outline as amended based on our discussion. Everyone should ensure that their microphones are not muted. All in favor of approving the outline, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Well, thank you then. The narrative outline is approved. Thank you again all for participating in our discussion based on your input provided during this telecon. The SEI team in NCSES will develop the draft reports, which will be distributed for the SEP and NSP review early next year as part of the external review stage of report development. I'd like to end our meeting just to see if there are any outstanding policy relevant or policy outreach ideas that have sprung to mind as a consequence of our discussion. That may be too big of a question to fit into the remaining 3 minutes, but I thought I'd let it float. Ivan?
I don't know if this is well, I guess it is a policy relevant thing. Is it just a kind of a big question that I have that I didn't want to interrupt the focus discussion today with, but I'll just put it out there. Something I'm thinking about is the idea of capacity.
Yes.
And metrics, relevant metrics. I don't know what the relevant metrics would be. What one kind of capacity that we talk about in the context of the missing millions is human talent capacity. And there I can kind of readily think of some metrics, right? Wanda mentioned, one is, where in the nation's geography do we have people of different demographic groups that represent capacity that could be developed, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with R&D, again, just a thought or a question that I'll put out there. If there's a way to identify metrics that would allow us to essentially overlay, where are the investments and the outputs happening on the one hand, and where is their capacity on the other hand, so that we can begin thinking specifically about where are there opportunities to leverage currently underutilized capacity. Right. Again, that's kind of an abstract way of framing it, but something that I'm thinking about a lot.
It's an excellent idea, and again, it crosscuts to many of the concerns that have been expressed on the board for quite a while now, ever since the formulation of Vision 2030, and I think it directly addresses Wanda's concerns that we need to be able to have sort of a higher level of intersection of all of this data if we're ever going to get at these questions. And now is really the time. I mean, we have these regional innovation engines, we have TIP, we have a lot of tools that we hadn't had in the past to start addressing these questions and coming up with answers that are focused based on the data. Marvi, you had your hand up as well?
Yes, and so like less than 30 seconds, I promise. So yeah, just to follow up on Kevin's on the idea of capacity and understanding what are those thresholds, right? The next, step for me is also understanding how do the investments derive as economic value. And so what that, to me, in my head means is you might have the acre capacity that you need for a particular field. Do you have it for these other particular field, which is really valuable? So not all fields, are basically at the macroeconomic level valued the same. And so do we understand those, I guess, the levels that we need for different fields, and then the economic derived value of those fields, and that applies to the capacity from people's perspective, but also from like technology investments, and then the translation of that technology into economic value.
Absolutely. Excellent points. I want to thank everybody today for this very valuable set of discussions. And I believe it concludes our business for today, with the meeting being adjourned at 11:31 Mountain Time, 1:31 Eastern Time. Thank you so much, everyone.